This is the Storyworks Roundtable, where we have conversations about craft. Because becoming a successful author begins with writing a great story. Hello and welcome to this week's Storyworks Roundtable. Today, Robert and I are joined by Carlee Tressel Olson. Carlee is going to be filling in for a couple of months while Catherine is on maternity leave. So yay, Catherine, we're going to have a new youngest member at the roundtable soon. Carlee is an independent writer and editor. She started her career in advertising and public relations agencies and now serves clients on a freelance basis, helping corporations, businesses, nonprofits, and entrepreneurs tell their stories, although her favorite thing to write is a long letter. She also enjoys writing fiction and creative nonfiction. Her short stories and essays have appeared in a variety of publications, including Car Bombs and Cookie Tables, the Youngstown Anthology, Casing Sport Communication, the Under Review, and Belt Magazine. Her first nonfiction book, The Corporate History of a Steelmaker in Pennsylvania, will be published by Paraffin Press in January 2021. A former resident of Chicago and Minneapolis-St. Paul, Carlee now lives and farms with her family in rural Indiana. Well, Carlee, welcome and thank you so much for filling in for Catherine. We are excited to have you with us.
Thank you for having me. This is thrilling.
Yeah, welcome. Fantastic. I love the big long list of experience as well. That's awesome.
Mm-hmm. And we're out of time. No.
And that's it for this week's episode.
Yeah, no pressure, Carlee, no pressure.
Yes, right. That means nothing. We're starting over.
Yeah.
Right. Well, congratulations on the Steel book coming to an end with a publication date coming up very soon. That's exciting.
Thank you. Yes, it is.
Yeah, and it ties into this week's topic, how do you know you're done with a project, which you suggested, so I'm going to let you bring us into the subject.
Yeah. So as I'm nearing the end of this very long project, which Alida knows I've been working on it for several years, and I realize several actually means 7 from... Wow. The beginning of starting the research for the project, starting to interview subjects, and then drafting, revising again, and editing. It's been quite a process. And it's been an interesting process because I am doing this for hire. So yes, I am the writer. Yes, I am the person who is crafting the story, but also there are other very important stakeholders involved in the creative process. And there have been other deadlines set externally for me. So, it hasn't just been me working on the project and trying to meet milestones that I've set for myself. There have been some external deadlines and some detours and snags and things that happen when you have several stakeholders working on a project, in addition to the normal things we encounter when we're working on a project ourselves. So as this project is finally wrapping up, I have been thinking about how this process of writing this corporate history, this nonfiction book length work, how it has been like and unlike the process of writing the novel that I was working on prior to this project, as yet unpublished novel. And what it got me wondering, reaching this part in the process, kind of looking toward the end, wrapping things up, is realizing that when I was finishing the rewrite of the novel I had been working on before, I felt like I'd gotten to a point where I had been working on it too long. So in contrast with this nonfiction book, writing it for another entity, for another organization who has a say in, is the final word on, this is the version we want, let's go with this version. When it was just me working on the project, I was the arbiter of that decision. Mm. And I feel like I wrote past the finish line with the manuscript, and actually something was lost in that. So I guess I wanted to hold those two experiences together and think about those and kind of bring this to the two of you and say, what has been your experience in revising too much, being too picky with your own work as an editor? Because that's the other thing is, each of us has experience editing. And so when we're editing our own work or other people's work, there is the writer brain or the writer part of the process, and then there's the editor part of the process. So some advice for me as I move forward with my next project.
Right. I think it's interesting that you're holding these two projects up side by side, and on one of them you had the other stakeholders, as you said, and so you had that feedback loop of, what might be missing, what might we not need, when are we done, when is it good enough, and so you were not wholly responsible, and you for that decision, and you were accountable to somebody else's opinion on the matter, right? Which, as objective as we might try to be, there's also, using the word stakeholder, points to how subjective this can be, how much of a vested interest we have in the work. And so do you think that by being our own sole investor in these projects, we're lacking something in that feedback process, in the insights of outside eyes?
I think so. I think so. I think there were moments in the process when it felt like even though I was submitting a draft to these other stakeholders, I thought, nope, I like it the way it is. I hope they don't have a lot of comments. But then inevitably there would always be at least a few comments, if not lots of comments, and a lot of feedback that really made the draft better. Mm-hmm. Which of course calls to mind, when you're working on your own project, not in collaboration with someone else, why the importance of having outside readers is so important. Mm-hmm. For exactly the reasons you're saying, Alida.
Yeah. Do you think sometimes, we're kind of talking about writing past the mark, but the flip side of that is maybe stopping too soon because, as you said, you think I'm done, whether it's right or I'm burned out, done, but then that could be an oops
right.
moment
right.
if you publish at that point. What is your thought on this, Robert?
Yeah, I think there's a strong difference between internalization and externalization of what's finished and what's complete. And so when you're in a creative work and you have no external stakeholders, there is no complete. It's entirely your decision. And creativity isn't easily, or something that's a creative work isn't easily measured, as we know. The beauty is in the eye of the beholder, or the story is in the mind of the reader. And so I think when you've got that editor brain on, it's different when you've got external stakeholders because they have measures. And you may not, as Carlee's really intimated, you may not know what those measures are. You send it off and you think, well, okay, I think it's done. It's really good. Right. And then it comes back with red lines all over it, yes. Which is fine because that's part of the contract that you have. But you don't really have that contract with yourself, I think, when you're editing. And that's why I think we try to separate those hats and say, okay, I've got my editor hat on today. I'm going to be cruel. I'm going to be vicious with it. But at some point, you've got to change state and come back to the work as an appreciator of art. And it's always going to be uneasy, I think, to claim done, because we all know that, perfect is the enemy of done. And every work of art goes out into the world unfinished. So it's a question of what is your level of unfinishedness. And when there are external stakeholders, that's easy to determine because they'll tell you. But if you're the only arbiter, then you may not know what your line in the sand is. So my advice is to come back to it as a reader. If you don't have external readers to start with, obviously, we all know that having another editor or having beta readers or having someone you trust to give you at least some commentary. And I've actually done that. I've asked the question before of a beta reader and said, do you think this is ready to publish? There's nothing wrong with asking something like that. I mean, they may take it all sorts of different ways. Well, I didn't find any typos. If that's all they say, they go, oh.
Right. Just setting the bar so low.
So I think that's why we advise. Well, you've got this typical Stephen King thing, which is, put it in a drawer for 6 months, which I don't agree with, but I do like the resting, because I think when you rest it and come back to it, now that's different. Obviously, if you've been working on something it sounds like it's a passion project that's been going for a few years, and so you're probably already very familiar with it. It's like a partner that you've been married to for that long. So you start to know it inside out, and that starts to get very tricky, I think, to say, okay, well, how do I experience this through different eyes and ears? Maybe it's a time to put it through a voice reader, or print it out, or read it on the Kindle, or take it on a holiday with you and imagine it was put a different name to it. Imagine it was somebody else's work, and try to get as many different, more objective subjectivity, if you like, because at the moment, I think when people reapproach it with the sense of this is work, then that's probably never going to tell you it's done. It's only going to be an emotion that tells you it's done. And so I'm looking for that emotional response that says, okay, I think it's there, and it's going to be uneasy, because we all know that you can keep working on that painting or statue or piece of writing, and maybe that final chipping away at that beautiful piece of marble knocks the poor woman's arm off, and then maybe it's something worse. So that's what you're referring to, Carlee, I think, is you feel like you can make it worse by being too perfection oriented.
Yes.
I think when I was first listening to you talk about it, I was thinking that with the project for hire, you've got a logical stakeholder with either a measure that you know about or a measure that you don't. The problem with a fiction project is that it's so difficult to measure, and the measure is probably emotional. And some of that emotion is going to be unease. So it's a matter of what level of unease you're prepared to live with. And then it's the external eyes. So I don't know that's much of an answer, but I do think it's a very deep-seated emotional thing.
I think that there's a lot. What part do I pick out from what you just said? Because I think there are so many pieces of that resonated with me. I think time is one of them, that is it the magical 6 months, or is it longer or shorter, depending on your situation and your needs. I think I'm really excited because so much time has passed. I'm thinking about the fiction project prior to this 7-year mammoth, that it's now been 5 years since I worked on that fiction project. So I'll be really interested to bring it to light again in the way you're saying, Robert. Either I love the idea of having it be, an audio recording, or print it out and kind of act like the manuscript fell on my desk, rather than, look at it on screen, just open the file. I think that's really interesting. But 5 years is a long enough time, I think, certainly for some distance or some emotional distance, but then also to be able to key in with, well, what do I feel when I read it? Because I think also writing past the finish line, if I can use that phrase again, with that particular manuscript or that revision, I know in retrospect that I got too technical at the end, right? Where I was comfortable was being a technician. Where I was comfortable was picking things, going with the fine scraper they use at the dentist's office to really get in there and get the little bits of plaque off, and that felt very, that felt like useful work, or like doing the right thing, and maybe even box checking a little bit rather than tuning into the art of it, or seeing it as an artist, even, approaching it as a technician versus, maybe even zooming out and seeing, well, am I doing what I wanted to do with this? Is the story satisfying? I could tinker with chapter 7. There's that number 7 again, but I could tinker with that particular chapter because I don't think it's quite right, but that really is missing. Well, how does that serve the larger story, or how is it operating in the larger story, rather than, something's not quite right, I'm going to go at it with my little fine scraper again.
So in some ways or in perhaps every way, there's nothing wrong with being the technician at the end to refine at that level, but you said that you felt like the manuscript suffered when you wrote past the mark. So if we shift our gaze from dotting I's and crossing T's to the artistry of it, in what way do you think it suffered, and what tells you that? Is it just a gut feeling, or can you kind of quantify it by pointing to things in the manuscript? We've got a big announcement this week on StoryWorks Roundtable. There is a new website. In the past, StoryWorksPodcast.com redirected you to a page at WordEssential.com. Well, the redirect is off, and we've got a new, sleek website at StoryWorksPodcast.com. So if you ever bookmarked the StoryWorks Roundtable page, make sure you move your bookmark. Also, I am super excited to announce the launch of a new podcast coming out in 2021. The StoryWorks Reading Series, a literary journal for the ears. It's an additional podcast in the StoryWorks family. Every month, I'll publish a new short story or lyric essay. The author will read the piece, then sit down with me to discuss the inspiration, process, and challenges of writing it. It's a podcast for readers, writers, and readers curious about writers. Let your writing and reading friends know about StoryWorks Reading Series. And if you're a writer, go to StoryWorksPodcast.com/submit. Read our submission guidelines and send us something. We'd love to see your work and you on the podcast.
I think there were parts from what I remember that became too precious. Mm-hmm. Like it became overwriting or adding too many details in a particular part, leaning too hard on a foreshadowing moment, such that it had a flattening effect, right? An emotional, and not literally, I'm doing this, but which for those of you listening, I'm making a smushing motion with my hands, but it's a flattening the emotion of the scenes. So instead of letting them breathe and maybe even allowing, I'm thinking about the process of drafting and allowing some connection with that unconscious place. I'm not sure how we feel about that, about that concept, but just kind of like letting a little more slack out and kind of seeing where things go creatively rather than, well, I know foreshadowing is necessary here, and if I add this detail and that detail, it should work. So I think there were moments that perhaps, or maybe I trimmed too much. I think it was like too much of some things and then cutting out others.
Yeah, it's like we're looking for a magical quality. I think we say this of musicians most in all of the arts, that the musician might play technically extremely well. The musician might be a beautiful technician, hit all of the notes perfectly in tune, but that feeling, the heart, the passion, the blood seems to be missing from the performance. And it seems like there's a way in which that applies to writing as well. You might be very technically gifted in crafting your prose, but we still need the heart, the blood to come through in the story.
Right. Yes. I always return to sports metaphors because that's just who I am and the stuff that comes up. But I feel like there's the technical, like the technical tennis player, and then who is going to do all the right things and win all the points at the right times and win lots of matches. But then there's the tennis player with style, and it's not either or. Let me also, as I'm ruining this metaphor already, but terribly. But then there's the tennis player with style that perhaps makes some technical errors, has also some incredible shots, and also wins a lot of matches. And perhaps if we're going to bring it back to enjoying a story, which is the more enjoyable experience for the person in the stands, for the reader.
Right. Well, it must be the one with heart or style, or, the passion. Isn't that what engages us above all else?
I think in fiction it has to, doesn't it? Because the reason we read is to be transported or to live vicariously, which is maybe a little different to a non-fiction project where there is some technical element to accuracy required and satisfying an information hunger to the reader, whereas in fiction we're satisfying a need to provide some experience for the reader, but literally we don't know what that is. Mm-hmm. We have no idea what they're going to gain from it. So all we have to go on is our own sense, which is why I think. When was the last time you read the work in its current state, Carlee?
I think it was almost 5 years ago. I think it was 5 years ago.
Oh, yeah, fantastic.
Yeah.
And how much had you put into it? So what state is it in? Is it been through several revisions?
Yes. Yeah. So it was a full. It was actually my thesis project in an MFA program, and then was rewritten twice after that. So it had been through the ringer in a very rigorous way, I guess, and then written and rewritten again based on other feedback.
Yep.
It's a lot of rewriting.
Do you think that because it went through the ringer 3 times there, did it become a matter of too many cooks in the kitchen? Were you getting too much feedback at that point, possibly?
Yes, I think so. And possibly the feedback, I don't want to say from the wrong people, because I don't all readers have worthy opinions, but I think who I was listening to most carefully, perhaps I could have been more discerning about what feedback I took, right? Because not all feedback is created equal. Every reader can have their opinion, in my opinion, but not all of it is useful to the manuscript.
Right, absolutely.
Or the purpose of it. I think that's the other thing too, is while again, a reader providing feedback may make a great point about it, but is that aligning with the spirit of what you're trying to do with the project?
Yeah. Yes, and I think that
Yeah,
and that gets back to the idea of the heart of the piece, because only the author is in touch with the heart, the spirit, the blood of the piece. We set out to create something with a certain purpose in mind, with an emotional connection to the story, to the characters. And so somebody might give you great feedback about a plot point or about a technical aspect or about a supporting character, but if it doesn't resonate with the author's guts, with the heart of the story, with that purpose in a spiritual sense, not in a plot arc, character arc sense, then it's worth seriously considering dismissing that feedback, and maybe not entirely out of hand, but taking what you can learn from it and then shaping it to align with the spirit of the piece.
Yes.
How are you feeling about picking this up again? You said previously that you were quite excited.
Yeah, that's a tough question, Robert, actually, because on some level, I feel like this project has been haunting me, and it's always a story that I'm revisiting, or maybe it visits me in my free brain moments, which tells me something, something.
It's alive,
It's alive, and I'm still interested in it. I would say I'm excited. I think I'm also a little fearful because of the time investment, actually, frankly, so I'm coming off of a very long project, a very long, different project. I also spent years on the fiction project I want to return to that we're talking about, prior to putting it away. And so I think I fear if I invest more time into it, is this a useful is this a good use of time, or is this trying to fix something that doesn't want to be fixed, or is this, let's dig even deeper. Are you ready? Is this me not willing to let go? Right? Is this me holding on to or is this me trying to, avenge something that didn't work out? Avenge, I don't know if is the right word, but trying to, salvage it maybe. And is it really just standing in the way of doing other projects?
Yeah, I think this comes back to those questions about what is it worth to you, and it's still living in your mind, so that's fabulous. I guess you'd have to be looking at, before I even went back to it, I'd be saying, how disappointed would I be if I never saw this ever again?
Yeah.
And if that hurts, then clearly it's a project that's still got creative life, and you've got to go back to it. Whether it's now or later, it doesn't matter, but it's still going to hold some heat. Which I think is fabulous. And then I think one thing I've done before with an earlier work is when I was still trying to learn more of the craft, is it's going to sound stupid, but it might appeal to your more technical brain, is I read through and then I mapped the emotional highs and lows that I experienced when I read, as opposed to things that I thought it needed fixing. And that's really interesting because I plotted it as a graph, and so I'm going to draw on the screen for anyone listening. But you've got the ups and downs, like a bit like a sine wave, but a really stupid, messy one where you get loads of stuff happening and then nothing, and then loads of stuff happening and nothing. And I thought, okay, I can clearly see where parts of this are just going to be, they just need to cut. There's no point in having them, and maybe they don't even need rewriting. It's that old story of, if it's not exciting to you, either writing or reading, then chuck it out. And so I think one of the things that's going to be, I'm hallucinating here and projecting, but that sense of fear, you're going to have to match with disappointment when you come back to it and you think, okay, I don't like that. So what will you do with that?
Right. Yeah. Right. And on some level, when you say that makes me actually excited to find out. When I pull open that metaphorical drawer, or literally I know the plastic bin that the printed out, drafts is in my basement, when I open that lid and bring it out and start to read it, I think I do want to know. I think I do want to know if it's something that I really would love to pick back up, or if I'm disappointed. I can handle the disappointment. I can do it, and maybe do something cool and ritualistic, like burn it, or something. I don't know, and I don't mean that in like a I don't know, like violent way, but just to let it go, just a way to say, this has done what it needed to do in my creative life, and now it's time to do something else.
Yeah, I think it comes back that terrible question of when's it done. That's going to haunt me for quite a while, because I think no artist is really ready to say, well, I did that perfectly.
Yeah.
I think.
Oh, please, Alida, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think a better question here is, when is it dead? Because we've shifted. We aren't really talking about when is it done, like ready for publication. I think we started there, but we've gone into this entirely psycho-spiritual realm of when do you on a project versus when is there life left on it. I always feel like if a piece won't let you go, if the story is holding on to you, then there's something there you need to return to, whether it's that particular manuscript, or maybe taking the heart of that manuscript, the central character or the theme or the piece of it that relates to some moment in your life, and turning that into a new project.
Yes. Because already I know that this will take on already in the kind of passive imagining and writing I've been doing on this project all along. It won't look much like it used to, and that is exciting to me. There's already some big differences between previous drafts and this one. Yeah.
Yeah, and you're also, you're older now, and you've got more experience under your belt, and you've done other creative work, you've done other projects, so it's going to look different when you come back to it. I think that part is quite exciting. And like I said, I think one thing we probably all have to manage is some sense of disappointment, but also some sense of revelation of, oh yeah, that's right. I like this bit.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. If you burn it, just burn the paper copy, though.
Of course.
One of my professors, I might have even been undergrad, a theater professor, and I forget which author, forgive me, but he told me with great disappointment that there was an author or a playwright who had gone back and revised all of his early works and bringing them up to his standards as a mature author, which my professor was deeply disappointed by, because then the world had lost the record of this writer's progression from young writer to, experienced writers. So,
well, when the biographers
Thank you for listening to the Storyworks Roundtable.
This is what I'm saying.
Find all our shows, show notes,
This was
and
Carlee's first
videos
groundbreaking
at StoryworksPodcast.com.
Right. Well, there must be a copy of your thesis in the library at Hamlin. So,
I was just thinking,
archivists, you can always go to Hamlin.
Hamlin University, cut to the chase.
That's right. Yes. Any final thoughts on this topic, on when to let it die and when to resuscitate it?
Even though I was the one who brought the question to the two of you and said, essentially give me advice on this, I do realize, and I realize now, thanks to your comments, that it really is up to the author, to the writer herself. That as much as I would love either of you or anyone else whose work and opinion I value to say, nope, let it go, or yes, dig into that, it really does come down to me or to you, writer, to decide when it is dead, or if there's still something there. And I just don't think there's any way around that.
Nope.
No, there isn't. There's no easy way out. So look within.
Look within. And there it is again. Yes.
Yes.
Thank you for listening to the Storyworks Roundtable. Find all our shows, show notes, and videos at StoryworksPodcast.com.